Welcome, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be here again, having another conversation with another incredible man. Tonight, I'm going to be speaking with Shay Douglas, who's had an incredible story and someone I'm just so looking forward to engaging with as part of these conversations on reimagining masculinity, men challenging porn culture. Shay, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your story this evening.
No problems at all, Daniel. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm super inspired by what you're doing in the world. And yeah, it's an absolute honor to be here and chat with your listeners and just unravel, unpack and deconstruct some of these notions so that we can, reimagine and embody what it looks like to really see healthy masculinity in the world. Super excited, man.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you connect with the language. It's something that just kind of fell into my soul one day and I've just been running with it. So before we kick off, I thought I'd do a little bit of an intro about you. There may be some people that know you or recognize you. But for those that don't, Shay was actually featured in a documentary that Exodus Cry created called Liberated, this new sexual revolution, which is actually still available on Netflix. Since that documentary and featuring in Liberated, Shay's been on a pretty significant journey of personal transformation, which I'm sure we'll jump into in this conversation. And for Shay, he kind of echoes my heart in this, in that he tries to embrace what it is to be an emotional and vulnerable man and to present an authentic identity to the world and inviting other men to do the same, which I just love that. I love that that's your heart and your disposition above so many other things that you could define yourself as. I love that this is where life has taken you. And for those of us who don't know you, you're up in Queensland now because, piecing together your accent as well as your journey.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I was born here in far north Queensland and actually left when I was about 17. I went over to the United States, pursuing my passion at that time to go and play soccer, as they would say over there. Or football. And coming from English heritage, my family are both from Northern Ireland, my father, and in England, my mother. And I'd spent a bit of time over there. But when I was living in the US, funnily enough, the entire team was pretty much foreign students playing soccer. And so I was working in an English pub and I picked up a bit of an English accent, which you can hear in the film. So
that explains it.
Grounding
now. That
back
makes
into
sense.
Australia. Yeah, definitely being back in the homeland, really grounded back into the Aussie vibes.
Aussie slang. That's fantastic. And can I ask, how did you end up? Obviously, you were in the US, as you said, for soccer, but how did you end up featuring on a documentary? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so it's really quite synchronistic story. In fact, I was in my third year studying over there, and I was really, really fortunate and privileged to be able to have that opportunity to follow my passions at the time, growing up as a young aspiring athlete. And whilst I was over there, I really had some challenging times, as well as some really kind of exciting and exuberating times as well. And one of the challenges for me was literally leaving everything behind. Left my family, left all of my friends, left uncles, aunties, everything that I knew as a norm, and jumped into this new way of living in college systems in the United States, which was really culture shock for me at that initial period as well, because I had grown up in Australia watching a lot of, American movies, American TV shows, all of these kind of films that highlight American lifestyle in a particular way, like American Pie and that kind of thing. And going over there and experience it, the college parties, the red cup beer pong, the flip cup and all those kinds of things, the sororities and the frat houses. And then suddenly here I was in this environment living the college life as a jock, let's say, those typical stereotypes that they play out in those films. And suddenly it almost felt like I was in a movie set already, because it was everything that I had known only through movie experience. And now I was kind of living that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And in my third year, a lot of my friends and I, who were international friends, mostly from England, we had such good camaraderie and banter between us. We used to give each other a lot of stick and a bit of a hard time sometimes, because we were basically family at that point. We didn't have really anyone else. We didn't have any uncles or aunts or parents around. And so we were like a real brotherhood. And because we were all a similar age and demographic and same gender and sex, we kind of got a little bit led astray.
Yeah.
And one of those adventures was when we went down to Panama City Beach in Florida. We decided to do this crazy adventure, hire a car, drive down 16 hours from the north of America all the way down to the south to go for literally one of the biggest parties of the year in the world for spring break.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, yeah, we're in college. Like, what else are you going to do? And so we thought it was going to be a great idea. And it's a week-long experience. It's kind of like Australia's equivalent of schoolies, let's say,
Yep.
but they do it every year for college students. And the number one destination is Panama City Beach, Florida. Everyone goes there, and it's like a week-long party. It's supposed to be a study break, but it's pretty much party break.
Oh,
and
me.
it's pretty wild. It's super crazy. And it just so happened that, on the second day, I believe, we were down there and we were really starting to get into it. And it's right on the beach, our apartment, we've got pools going. Everyone's having a great time. And we were walking back from the pool down to the beach, and there was this huge film crew. It's like set up interviewing people, and they had cameras and they had everyone signing consent forms and lighting and sound crew, and they hey you guys want to jump in this, we just want to ask you a couple of questions about spring break. And so we thought, yeah, go on, why not, this will be funny, like just have a good time. And so we started answering a few questions, and because we just give each other so much stick all the time, they could really see that banter and that kind of connection that we had as brothers. And they really liked that. They found that quite interesting and funny. And so they kept on asking us, oh, do you mind if we come to the clubs with you tonight? And then do you mind if we go to the party and keep filming you behind this and get behind the scenes of what's happening at spring break? And we just thought, yeah, why not? Like, we were definitely under the influence of a lot of different substances at that point, and very carefree, and we just threw it all in and, gave them the best of what we had. And so, the end result is the movie. And then those who are watching now, if you haven't seen Liberated, you just jump on Netflix and you can see it. And it's it's available for anyone to watch. And I really sit in this position where I am now, where I am now, and able to have these conversations, because although the film shows me in quite a negative light, based upon some of the actions that I was doing at that point, I really see the relevance that, and I can kind of step outside of my own shoes and look at it from another perspective, another lens, and see how this story and this documentary can play a hugely significant role for other young boys and young men coming into the world, and also women. I just wanted to leave a little disclaimer. I'll probably mostly only likely talk to the manhood part, although the film does cover both men and women coming of age. I can only speak from my experience, and I know I am a man, so I can talk about men's business. Unfortunately, even though I've got two beautiful sisters who I grew up with and a loving partner now, I can't really speak for women's business, because most importantly, I'm not a woman. But the film does cover those dynamics, let's say, and it really reveals some truths that can be kind of hard to look at and face. Yep. And since that period, I've really dove deep in discovering these deeper existential questions of human existence, such as, who am I, and what does it mean to be a man, and all of these ultimately fundamentals that we should be normalized in our conversations as growing men, but have somewhat been suppressed or limited or shut down. And that's why I'm inspired by what you're doing, Daniel, with these conversations, is just to start by having the conversation, opening up the lid, looking at exploring some of these taboo subjects like sexuality, which Liberated goes into in quite depth, and these notions of gender and equality and masculinity. So I'm super excited to be here, man. And it's been a beautiful journey. because I can sit in this position now and reflect back on these periods in life and look at how that has happened for me rather than to me. And what I mean by that is see the benefit that this can have for others as well, to recognize within their own story the potential for change, the potential of transformation, and have a sense of hope. Even though we're kind of in this period in our human history story on a macro level, if we look at what's going on around the world, and especially what you're doing with exposing a lot of truth and bringing a lot of light into these areas, it's quite chaotic, and it's a little bit scary to see what is actually happening in the world. There's lots of chaos, there's lots of quite harmful, destructive kind of things happening in the world. And so my hope and my intention in sharing on these topics and part of the inspiration that I want to offer for people is, that there is ultimately hope for humanity. And for me, that has begun with, a really deep journey of self-exploration, self-inquiry, and self-discovery.
Yep.
And then once that path has initiated and begun, coming into an awareness of, how can I support the community that I find myself in? How can I have this big shift in my psychological awareness of how we treat others, and particularly women, to how am I treating myself and how am I treating my community?
It's great. It's so wonderful, Shay. I was going to ask, how long ago was that you featured in Liberated? Just to give a gauge of the journey.
Yeah, that was in 2013. We were down in spring break. So I was about 20 years old.
Okay, thank you so much. No, it's just good for context, because undoubtedly anyone listening to you now, certainly if anyone has seen the documentary already, can see, how much you've changed. But I want to touch on, was there a catalyst? How long was it after Liberated where you kind of went, this kind of hookup, hypersexualized culture, spring break, that's not for me, or started to kind of peel back the lens on that? When did that happen? And was there a moment or a steady awakening?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Daniel. Thanks for asking. There's been a number of catalysts, to be honest. The initial catalyst was that period right after spring break, when that was kind of like this heightened, elevated moment in my life, because I just split up with my partner. I'd been on this crazy rampage and got back to university, and I had my third knee injury, where I dislocated my ACL, tore my ligaments, my knee, and had to undergo my third total knee reconstruction. And at that point, my life was kind of in the pit, let's say, at the very bottom of this really dark kind of period of life of my soul. And it was in that moment, that because my passion had been dissolved, the doctor was telling me I'll never play sports again, I'd be very lucky if I'm walking. I had to undergo another operation. It was like my whole world was crumbling down at that point. And after such, these kind of ecstatic highs that were very instantaneously and superficial, like spring break, then going down to these deep depths of huge identity crisis, because everything that I had worked towards, I was very egocentric and driven at the time, and all of that had come crumbling down, because suddenly I was a nobody, and I was hurting, and I was in a lot of pain physically. And it took some time for that emotional unraveling to also reveal itself. And so it was from that point when I kind of had to let go of all of my dreams of pursuing the soccer career, and I ventured out and explored other areas of conscious movement, and started trying yoga and meditation and trying these different things. And the film didn't actually come out until 5 years later. And so in that time span between spring break, when it happened, and the film being released 5 years later, I'd kind of been on this soul searching journey, let's say. I'd traveled in different parts of Central America, and I'd left everything behind again and went traveling through Asia and exploring different communities and permaculture centers, and trying to find, meaningful connection, trying to find myself. And I was really searching all across the globe. You know, I was lost, and I kind of had openly admitted it to myself by going on this journey and seeking for some answers. And then once the film was released, wow, that just brought on a whole new level of inner work that was required, because it really started to open up a can of worms into doing even more unraveling, even more peeling back the layers and exploring deeper sense of emotion that was coming up at that time around the shame that I felt, and also the guilt, you know, looking back, seeing myself on camera, seeing myself in film, acting like this absolute fool. I was embarrassed, you know. And I was really wrestling at the time.
Yeah.
Really, I remember I was back in Australia at this point, and I was wrestling with like this film coming out. And I remember the whole production team were extremely graceful, and they kind of give me the pre-warning, let me know the film's going to be released, we'll let you see it before everyone else. And I got to watch it, and I was just like, oh my God, my head was buried. I couldn't bury it deep enough in between my hand.
Yeah.
And I was kind of, at this point, I had, you know, two options. I was kind of looking, option one, run away from it. Don't tell anyone, hide, you know, like just deny, don't face it. And that was, you know, I was really considering that as an option. And then there was a part of me that was also very afraid. And it kind of is this little inner voice inside me that was like, look, Netflix is worldwide. Everyone can see it. You can't run from this. This is a part of you, and you're going to have to face it. You're going to have to be really accountable here. You're going to have to be responsible. And, you know, this is an opportunity. Although it's going to be difficult and challenging, I've really got to take some level of accountability here. And so at that point, I knew I had to show my family, like my mom and dad. I had to be the one to show them first, because if they had stumbled across this video on their own, they would have been, I don't know how they would have responded. But I was blessed that my folks were super loving and supportive, and I sat down and watched it with them, and I was super nervous.
Gosh.
But
I feel awkward just hearing that, but gosh. Oh, wow.
And yeah, that was a massive process, but I was able to overcome the fears and muster up the courage that I had inside and face it. And I was met with real loving grace, which was beautiful. And from that point as well, I'm super grateful for the entire production team who invited me after I had reached out to them. And because I was really on this journey of healing, and I was on this journey of finding myself and wanting to resolve any unresolved emotional trauma, and really understand the notions of the psyche and how these imprinting periods as a young child had impacted my life, and the patterns that were reappearing in the way that, you know, I was conditioned from my father and how I would treat women as a young adult. And so Benjamin Nola, the director and producer of the film, he said, yeah, we would love for you to come and join us in the release. As we do, they had planned this world tour, travel the United States, visit all the top universities, going to, you know, the likes of Berkeley, UCLA, University of Texas, Mary Washington, all these places, and then going over to London and Oxford and Cambridge and all these places across England. And that was another opportunity for me to muster up a sense of courage and, again, take responsibility and face some of these fears and really take ownership for my actions. And, you know, it was a huge process. So in that period, it was extremely challenging for me. But again, that, just to answer your question, that was another beautiful opportunity for more expansive growth and deeper awareness and comprehension through the language, and being able to articulate my experience and understanding the conditioning that we're susceptible to through these forces of media and advertisement and pornography and all these different elements that contribute, although I was never blaming any of these, but just looking at from another external perspective and lens to see how they all had played a role in my upbringing and led me to this point where I was behaving like a boy who knew, wasn't considering others, but very much in his own identity and ego, and very much about consuming and taking, and rather than opening up and being a man and giving and being of service. And so I am super grateful, because that also played a huge catalyst in really understanding, comprehending the way that our society and our culture has been somewhat programmed, let's say, through the lens of this hypersexualized culture that we find ourselves in. And that was a huge awakening period in itself. I spent about 5 months with the production team at that point, and I'm grateful for how much support and love they showed to me in that period, because as I reflect on it now, a couple of years later down the track, that was even, the next level depth of the pit that I could dive into, the dark night of my soul, because I had, thought my identity had been crushed to a certain level. And the next thing, it was going even deeper. And at this point, I'm grateful for it. And I can't thank them enough. And it might seem odd that, it seems super odd that I'm grateful for this movie where I copped a lot of flack for, people were,
I know that. We'll jump on that.
Really,
do you mind if we hold that for a moment? Because I do want to go there and just give a little bit more context to that. But I do want to pick up on, when you said like accountability, and I admire that about you. And I think that is just so encouraging, having, speaking to you for the first time ever today, like hearing you talk about like having to own that and be accountable, which is just extraordinary, because I think so much of the frustration in the world, and here in Australia, like we're in the midst of a sexual assault crisis, is this notion that men get away with this stuff, that there isn't accountability. And then here you are having to be accountable to all of this. And I think there is just this lingering frustration that men aren't accountable for the way that they have treated women. And I just want to honor you for owning that and being so brave, in a sense, to go out there and have to put your face next to this story, even though it doesn't represent who you are anymore, and to allow it to be told for the sake of others, and I just want to commend you for that. And to give a little bit of context, Shay's done me such a favor in bringing up the premieres, because I had heard through the grapevine that when you did come out, so they would obviously premiere the film Liberated, then afterwards they do a Q&A panel, and then Shay would come out, and that actually provoked quite a strong reaction at different times. Do you want to share that? I obviously wasn't in the room, but I just wanted to give some context for any of the, the listeners, the viewers who may not have understood exactly what was happening there and what that was like, because obviously, as you say, you're not portrayed in the best light, and reasonably so, given your behavior, to then come out on stage. What was the response?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And thanks very much for honoring that side of myself, and I really appreciate you, Daniel. Thank you. That was, so when we did at each university or school or theater, we did a screening. We had a follow-up initial Q&A. We had some of the cast and some of the board of directors and people in the film, including myself. And the film on its own, if you haven't seen it, it is very controversial, let's say. It touches on some topics that
it's hard to watch.
Isn't everyday conversation. It's quite hard to watch, particularly towards the end. It gets pretty challenging to sit with. And then if that wasn't challenging enough, here is the antagonist, let's say, on the male perspective, sitting in flesh right in front of you. And you get to ask him a question. And so I was certainly challenged with that, and I had to really practice being very present and honest. And even though part of my conditioning as a young boy is to really prove that I have what it takes, let's say. I was always trying to measure up and trying to, gain acceptance from the primary he in my life, which was generally my father. But when he was no longer present, and the primary he became my mates around me, that measuring up looked like, getting the ticks of how many girls you can sleep with, which is what the film is based on. And so that sequence or that belief played out in patterns throughout my life. And when I'm sitting there in front of the audience, I'm sitting with this like deeply ingrained from 20 plus years of conditioning and practicing of like being perfect, having it all worked out, measuring up, being okay, and
but not having any weakness.
Not having any weakness, exactly. And so a lot of the questions came out. Some people were very vocal about the way that they felt about me, which was not very positive. And some people were on the opposite end of the scale. And it was funny because as I was traveling, once the movie was released, it had huge feedback and growth from a lot of people online through Netflix. It got a lot of view time. And because my Instagram page was up on the film, a lot of people started to connect with me on Instagram and direct message me. And some of them were really vocal about how narcissistic and sociopathic I am. And others on the other end of the spectrum were like, yeah, man, you're amazing. Awesome. Let's go party. And then here's me in the middle, like trying to like navigate my life with integrity when I've got like both ends of the spectrum coming at me. And a lot of the times I didn't even know what to respond. I just left it, didn't say anything, and just really took it inside myself to explore and to see where it took me. But part of the journey and really having these Q&As, it really helped me to digest a lot of the deeper comprehension around the culture that we find ourselves in. And I also had lots of time in between all of the screenings to do a lot of self-reflection as to my entire life, and to look at these significant moments in my life and how this pattern, or these many patterns, had played out, and really to make use of the function of this tour to be a foundational marking point for me to consciously choose to shift that direction and those patterns and make a change. And I'm sitting here, a few years later down the line, not saying that I have it all worked out, but I'm every day, working towards that more and more and more. And,
of course.
And it's a constant journey, always learning and going deeper and understanding and kind of alchemizing those deeper feelings. Because at the time I was, again, in this period where I had left everyone behind, all of my mentors and teachers and families and friends. And I was with this production team who there was definitely people who I looked up to and felt I could relate with and open up and share. But it was also very much an inner journey for me. And reflecting back on it now, there was a lot of emotional turmoil that was still needing to come up. And I remember, I'll share one quick story. It was towards the end of the tour where they were filming, they filmed the entire tour for a second Liberated. And they were interviewing me and really kind of starting to press into how I was going with the tour, how I was handling all of this feedback from all of the people, what the Q&A was like. And here I am in front of this professional film crew, lights, cameras, everything, beautiful setup. And they just kept on pressing in. And then it just hit me, boom. And I just broke down. And I had probably never cried like that since I was a young boy.
Wow.
And it was the first time in maybe 15 years, and my eyes were just bawling, like they were so red and just so much water coming out. They had really just struck something deep inside me. Had this huge emotional release, and it was all caught on film. And I was kind of like, at that point I didn't care, because it was like so overdue. But then it took me a while to tidy myself up and really like clean up, and that was it. And I said, I'm finished. I'm done. You know, I need to process all of this and what's happening, what's going on, because my head was just kind of in this whirlwind. I just had this massive release of emotion and didn't really know what was happening to me.
Yeah, wow. How good's a good cry though? So healing.
Yeah,
a big ugly cry.
Man.
It's so healing. Yeah, I love you sharing that. Thank you so much. Like, it so appreciated. And you know, I'm so big on normalizing that for boys to be able to feel their emotions, for men to be able to feel their emotions and process it, you know, and to not put it in the weakness, you know, category. Because the classic thing is like men say we don't have emotions, but they're pretty adept at getting angry or frustrated or violent, or, you know, like being overcome with those kinds of emotions. But obviously showing grief or sadness in that way, which is seen as vulnerable, is off limits. And I think so much, you know, pain and grief that so many men carry, and young men, you know, I just would love to make sure that they get all the help that they need, and champion that in every school, that, you know, it's okay to speak and to get help. So I just so appreciate you, you know, modeling that and living that and authentically sharing that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No worries at all. Yeah, thank you too. I can appreciate people who are supportive of men to fully express whatever they feel is relevant and necessary as it comes up. So thanks, man.
Yeah, I was always a soft, sensitive kid. I was raised by single mum largely, and I went to an all boys school. And, you know, I remember there were times where I cried at school, and you learn the hard way that that's something that you can never, ever do, you know? And it's amazing how that, you know, that messaging gets in. And the reality is I couldn't shake being a soft, sensitive kid, you know. I never have, and I never will, because it's just how I'm created. But it was definitely hard going through those teenage years, even up until early 20s, where you're like, everything in you wants to crush the kindness out of you, that wants you to become calloused, you know, as part of the kind of grooming that we all experience. And, you know, that was certainly a theme in the previous interview with Professor Jensen, who touched on that, you know, and how difficult it is in this culture for boys to stay kind and caring and empathetic when there is so much pressure on them through either pornography or just socialization or their upbringing, you know, to perform masculinity in a particular way, you know. So I so appreciate this. Can I ask, you know, like, how much have like your views changed? Like, where would you say your attitudes towards women were back then, like we're at Liberated, you know, versus say now?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I really realize, and the message that I like to share for young men and young boys, is asking the question around what is actually the difference between a boy and a man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does it take for a boy to become a man, and when does that actually happen? And so for me, what I realized in that period, even though I was 20 years old, I had, you know, matured physically, you know, had gone through my puberty years, and I'd actually been working out at the gym at that point in my life and gained quite a lot of strength. And I looked like a man. I was a man's body physically, but psychologically and emotionally, I was an infant, very much a boy at most. And there's a huge difference between the mindset of a boy and a man. As much as there is an emotional intelligence difference between a boy and a man. And I would say very much at that period in my life when I was at spring break, and I was very egocentric. It was all about me, and it was all about, you know, proving myself and going out and, you know, making use of women for my own gain and my own benefit, going out and sleep with as many as I could, just so I could get more approval from my mates and more acceptance, because there was a deep yearning and hole missing inside of me that I had to validate externally, that I had to consume things, take things from out there to fill that void in there, which was a, you know, forever deepening hole. Unless it had been fully resolved and healed. And so now as a man, I recognize that I have many flaws as a human being. I haven't definitely got it all worked out, and I'm perfectly imperfect, and I'm okay with that. But I see the difference in the psychological notions of being of service to others and exploring what the deeper elements of a man in the world, to live with integrity, to have honorability, to be practicing nobility, and these beautiful key examples of men who I look up to and am inspired by, who I class as mentors, who often, every time, not just put themselves last, but praise, uplift, support, care for, and love other people just as much as they would love to be loved in return. And so that has been a big lesson for me, because as I reflect back and when I understand the kind of missing links in our culture, I would say the elements that are missing that help boys transition into manhood, these rites of passages or these journeys, culturally significant journeys that take the boy to go through a process and to bring him into manhood, was absent in my life.
We don't have it.
Absolutely
we don't have it here.
Not
we
there.
don't have it in the Western world at all. And yeah, it's tragic not to have those rites of passages. And we see the fruit of it. Fatherlessness is a huge issue. Something that I experience when I unpack like healthy masculinities with the boys is we put it all out, we speak to it, and then we say, like, if we look in culture, like in society, who do we think like embodies like a good portion of that? Who's embodying those healthy ideals? And they really struggle. A few boys might say their granddad or an uncle or their dad, which is so wonderful, but for the most part it's so hard for them to identify who are people that embody all these wonderful attributes, of what we think like healthy, holistic, authentic masculinity looks like. And that's something that always grieves me, and without fail it happens at every single school I go to.
Yeah, it's a big key missing element. But what is also exciting is that there has been many practices across time and cultures that still exist today that have served beneficial for that process and that transition in a young man's life. And that, exactly what you're doing with the talks at schools and going and having these conversations with young men is a great stepping stone to creating these environments where these rites of passages can take place, whether it be at camps or it be with a father and son or a men's group or whatever, that there is people like yourself who are initiating this opportunity for a new way forward, a new paradigm of understanding masculinity through experience. And that's probably a key element in all of this, is that so many people, and I've done it in my life as well, is that like you could watch all the YouTube videos on how to do something, you could read all the books about it, but until the experience on a physiological, emotional, psychological level has gone through that process, then that ultimately becomes the greatest teacher. It's like the university of life in its own right. And so
yeah, I agree.
Creating the right environment.
Yeah, I had a former boss who said to me, like, you have to prove yourself to yourself, in the sense of, as a man, do you deal with those feelings of inadequacy, those insecurities? Because that's what keeps me up at night, is just knowing that these insecurities that men carry with them are what makes them dangerous, not only to themselves, to other men, but obviously, and in particular, to women and girls, and having to actually resolve that, to heal that, and to prove something to themselves, not in an ego way, but in a way that actually grounds them, that actually surrenders that sense of then having to find ways, as you say, to take, to consume, to bolster yourself, because you do feel grounded, you do feel secure. And so, yeah, that's been, as you say, a huge journey. And I'm the same, like, haven't arrived, still continuing to identify those weaknesses and those insecurities and those things that hinder me from being fully human, and to flourish in that way. So I so appreciate your honesty, being able to speak to these things. Can I ask another personal question, like looking back and, younger Shay and the guys you were hanging out with, can I ask, like, how much was pornography, an impact or an influence in your mindsets and or even just those that you associated with,
Yeah, definitely, man. Thanks for asking. I'll happily share on that. Before I do, I just wanted to touch on one thing you said
Go
that I
for it. Go
just
for
like
it.
struck a chord with me, and I love what you shared, man. Because insecurity, just being insecure in myself, because as that young boy at spring break, I was totally insecure, and I was masking it like this confidence with an accent, with this persona, with this ego, whatever I could to cover up that I was actually weak and insecure and frightened little boy in this big wide world. And so that was a huge key element, particularly as well when I remember I was around 13 years old and I was at school in high school. I was about grade 8. It's in the schoolyard. And at this period, I was a late developer growing up. I didn't have pubes until I was 14, 15 and went through my, puberty later on in my life. And so at this point, I remember sitting around the lunch table with all these different guys. And one guy is telling us how he's already, slept with this girl. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I couldn't believe it because, I hadn't even considered doing anything like that at this point in my life. And ultimately, like, he's telling us this whole big story. He's riffing off on what it was like in the experience. And I couldn't even comprehend it at that point in my life. I was way too naive and ignorant. And, but that also really ignited this curiosity. And I was kind of like, I want to learn about this thing, sex, let's go and find out what this is and how it works. And I was way too ashamed to ask my mom or my dad, or I had an older sister, but wouldn't go there. So we had dial-up internet at that point, and I'd jump on the computer at home and just started doing my own little bit of research and study. I'd put my homework aside, and straight away it's like pornography is the go-to, and it's obvious looking at it from an external lens how women are treated, and it's very biased. In all pornography that's out there, it's something crazy. Like in statistics, takes up around 30+% of all of the videos on the internet. It's like something crazy how widespread pornography is, how easily accessible, unregulated, anyone at any age can get access to it. And that happened for me. And I had, grown up on porn, let's say from a young age, looking at it, and trying to understand sexuality and all of these subtle subconscious cues that porn was just like imprinting on my psyche around how men treat women, how sex should be conducted, what intimacy looks like.
That's
and
right.
I mean, you only need to, it's super obvious how destructive it is for women. It's all sexual objectification. It's all about the man's pleasure. And she has to do everything that he wants. There's nothing into consideration as to how she feels or what she would like. And ultimately, a lot of the porn out there is actually quite violent, and it's very harmful for women. And so when that becomes the primary basis for sexual education, there becomes a real disconnect in the way that I was relating with women, because I was taking that as, the book of sex, let's say, and practicing that in all of my sexual relationships. And so then it quickly pans out to be quite harmful. And a big thing that really connected the dots for me whilst I was on tour during the screening tour in the United States was because ultimately when I was a young kid, it was normal for young males to go party, to go and have a few drinks, go and hook up with a few girls, even have a one-night stand. That was somewhat praised in the male community. And I really started to connect the dots when the film highlights this specifically, where it looks at, the influence of pornography in media, how that impacts us to normalize and think that it's okay for these one-night stands and these sexual interactions, and then how that further leads to even worse sexual objectification, rape culture, how that leads to this horrific end of the scale, end of the spectrum. And then when I was seeing it, like it was all connected, And I was, as we were all susceptible to different parts of media and hookup culture, and that end destructive outline, it really pieced a puzzle for me. And I thought, wow, that's horrific, because I am very much a part of that. And coming into that awareness and having that awakening, I realized that, well, it's up to me if I want to change that.
Yep.
And so pornography has, had a huge impact and quite significant role in my life. And I just wanted to place a huge significance on the work that you're doing, as well as Exodus Cry and, getting Pornhub shut down and working on all these sites, because ultimately it's super harmful and destructive for the neurochemistry in the brain for young people who's still developing and growing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm the living witness of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure there's many others.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. I think the science for me is pretty much settled. The global research on the harms of pornography to, those involved, those who consume it, and then obviously to those who then act it out in the real world. It's horrific, but the anecdotal stories that just continue to mount, I just think is unavoidable anymore, in terms of we need to respond to this and want better for people. And as you touch on it, it is the primary sex education, but it's like, what is it actually educating us about? Like, what is it actually forming people about sex, about love, about relationship, about intimacy, about pleasure, and these are not small topics, these are not small things when it comes to us as human creatures and how we relate to one another. And so, yeah, I think it's so important. And I'm so grateful of men like yourself, like Benji, and just others who are just obviously speaking out against this and exposing the harms. But more than that, actually wanting to create something good and beautiful. And that's ultimately where I'd love to land this conversation with you, Shay, is like to look at, like, what does it look like to create something different, to reimagine something? And like, if you had your time again, if you could go speak to young Shay, like, what would you say to him? Like, what would you want him to get? Or if it was just any young boy, but say it's you, young Shay.
Yeah, wow, that's a really great question, man. What would I say to my younger self? Probably a lot of things.
No doubt.
At the same time as I would say a lot of things, what I've noticed is that there has been, and from my research and understanding how nature works, that there is a purpose to everything in life, and all the circumstances and events and experiences all serve a function for growth. And I realized that was very relevant and necessary for my journey, for me to go to that place, and ultimately, ideally, that we can have a probably more of a macro level shift in our culture, that we can start to begin to foster younglings, foster young children, young boys, young men in more positive ways that become living examples and lifestyles, rather than just a one sentence thing to say to them, or a one word that I would share to myself. But the questions that I would ask would be, what does it take to foster an environment for young men to feel connected, to feel a sense of belonging, that they have the ability to be able to share openly and express their deeper heartfelt emotions and experiences without being judged, or without being shut down. And that's probably what I would look to help shift and change the culture that we find ourselves in.
I love that.
So yeah,
I love that. And yeah, for me, it's celebrating. It's wanting to celebrate the good men and good, healthy examples. And, I think we so need that. We need better male role models for young boys, finally got there in the end.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, like
one short story that I feel
please.
to share in this moment, just before we close up. And I love what you shared, and that's what ignited it when you said we should celebrate young men, often we do celebrate young men if they've excelled, let's say. And that was my biggest challenge, was like, I felt that I had to excel and then be really good at sports, be really good in the classroom, or be really good at something. And then I would gain approval. I would gain acceptance. I would gain, you know, celebration. And I remember when I had my first wet dream, it's so funny. Like I couldn't have imagined, you know, this would have happened. But I had this dream, kind of, you know, made it very messy in the bed. And I was having feelings of shame because I wanted to hide it. I wanted to make, you know, first time ever in my life, I would wash my own sheets, you know, because I didn't want anyone to know about it. And I kept it very secret. I kept it to myself, didn't tell anyone. And I guess where I'm going with this in a roundabout way is like in that point of celebration that you said is, you know, as young boys become into men physiologically, like in their physical, going through their hormonal changes, it becomes very evident at that period in time that there is something significant happening on a biological level. And then how do we celebrate that? You know, how do we celebrate them having these hormonal differences and, you know, getting a deeper voice and, you know, growing hair in unusual places and, you know, fostering, again, an environment where young men feel comfortable to express, hey, this is going on for me.
Yeah, embracing
and
them
just,
rather than making them feel insecure, you know, and driving them away. Because that's
exactly.
my biggest thing is like whatever hides in the dark isn't good, you know, and so much. And obviously not to do with this biophysiological changes, but with all of these issues is like wanting to create a place where boys can speak openly about this and get the support that they need.
That's right. Exactly right.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I guess for me, like looking out going forward from here, like what's on the horizon for you in terms of this message and embracing it and sharing it? Do you still get contacted by people from the documentary?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't heard too much recently from the production crew,
Right
although I am
now,
still in
people
touch with
go and
the
start
entire
watching it
team.
again.
Yeah, I'm sure many people watch it now. I do get the odd, you know, connection on Instagram or something. Was that you from Liberated or something, you know? And you know, having these conversations with people like you really inspire me. And yeah, I feel I'm part of a few local community groups and sporting teams, and my vision moving forward is, you know, just to live with integrity, be a good man, serve my community, and one day I hope to be a father. You know, I hope to have kids of my own and raise them in a really wholesome way and support their evolution and help to be a part of this larger paradigm shift that we're moving through as a culture to, again, embrace young men, young boys to become men. My older sister is, she just had a young fella. So, you know, he just turned 3 last week, and I'm a nephew. I'm an uncle now. He's got a little nephew. So my vision moving forward is just, you know, be the best man that I can to support new life on this earth and give them the best opportunity to be the best person that they can be, you know, create that environment. And they're the questions that I'm asking. What does it take for me to foster a really loving, nurturing environment for my nephew Ziggy to grow up and, you know, feel that at any point he can come to me and fully express, feel okay with sharing, allow his emotions to flow. He can come up to me and be, hey, Uncle Shay, Uncle Shay, Uncle Shay, like I got something to share with you, something exciting. And for me, that's really, really important.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that vision that it's more than just us. Like we like the greatest gift we can obviously give the world is like our own healing and our own transformation as we confront these elements. But then I love that you're thinking about community and family. And, you know, it is cliche. And Melinda and I say it all the time whenever we're engaging with like parent sessions is like, it takes a village, you know, and it does. And for young boys, like they might not always go to their older brother or older sibling or dad or mum, but actually knowing that they have other people, and in particular other men, like in their court that, you know, are wanting the best for them, that want to see them flourish. Because yeah, I certainly, to, you know, to the other side of that insecurity is like to be believed in, you know, to have someone encourage you and see your potential. Not to say that you don't have to confront those elements of us all that, you know, we need to leave in the past, but to have someone be able to speak to your potential, to speak to like what you could be capable of, you know, as you mature and get a vision for your life that's bigger than yourself. And I think for me, that's something I always want to leave the boys with, as much as I I challenge them a lot on these issues, and for good reason, but wanting them to, get a picture, what could life look like? How do I want to be regarded as a man, as a friend, as a dad, as a partner, down the track? Like, and what can I do to cultivate that? What do I need to start doing now to be the type of person that makes other people feel safe, and, that they would feel that they can trust me, that they're going to be met with, kindness. And that's kind of the challenge, I think, before all of us. And I just love your journey. I love your story, Shay, and how powerful it is. And I hope you have so many more opportunities to share it. And I just want to thank you again for this time that you've shared with us. And I look forward to hopefully getting up to Queensland and spending some time with you, meeting you in the flesh for the first time. And being able to have even more of these conversations. So thank you so much.
Yeah. No worries, brother. Thank you, man. Appreciate you, having the courage to reach out and initiate these conversations. I'm sure you're going to have many more incredible conversations with lots of different people. And super blessed to have met you, and look forward to meeting you soon in the future, man.
Let's hope so. Once these borders open. Thank you, Shay. Cheers.